All right, in these slides, we're going to talk about feedback loops. So let's first define feedback loops. And so feedback loops are the circular path seen in a system in which the output of the system participates in the control of the system. It can be positive, in which the loop results in an increasingly strong response, or it could be negative, in which the loop helps stabilize a response or maintain equilibrium. So just to summarize, positive feedback loops happen when the circular path leads to a ramp up of a response, and negative feedback results in a stabilization of a response. Let's go over a few examples. So we're going to first talk about positive feedback loops. And so over here, you see that increased greenhouse warming results in more tundra being melted. And in the tundra, there's stored methane. And so that methane, as it melts, or as the tundra melts, the methane gets released. And so you get increased methane emissions, which leads to more greenhouse warming, which leads to more tundra being melted, which leads to more methane emissions being released, and so on in this circular fashion. All right, another example of positive feedback loop is, so you have the temperature rise, which melts Arctic Sea, Arctic Sea ice melts. So the polar ice caps are melting. And as a result, so that ice will reflect a lot of energy back into space that comes into the atmosphere. And so as that ice disappears, less of it is able to get reflected, and the ocean actually absorbs more heat, which in turn increases the temperature, which in turn melts more ice. And then there's more dark ocean to absorb the energy, which raises temperature again. All right, let's look at one negative feedback loop. So if you have an increase in CO2 in the atmosphere, that will increase plant growth. So we call that photosynthesis, because there's more CO2 to be incorporated in photosynthesis of plants, which in turn decreases CO2 in the atmosphere. But then once CO2 is decreased in the atmosphere, it slows plant growth. And then once the plant growth gets slowed, then it's incorporating less CO2 in the plants, which in turn increase the CO2 in the atmosphere. But then once CO2 in the atmosphere is increased, then photosynthesis increases like this. So this stabilizes the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. So we call this a negative feedback loop.